Years ago, I never imagined my life would veer so wildly off course. Back then, I was a driven lawyer, fixated on winning every case that came my way. My clients were often unsavory, some even dangerous names whispered among certain circles, people I wasn't always proud to represent. But I thrived in that chaos, quickly learning that law was less about justice and more about strategy. My knack for navigating this murky terrain earned me both wealth and a certain infamy. The further I delved into this world, the more ensnared I became, building alliances with those who could tip the scales in my favor. Over time, my sense of right and wrong shifted, leading me to choices that left me indebted to men like Sergeant Devon Cross. Despite his reputation for integrity, our paths crossed at the lowest point of his life, a meeting that would later come back to haunt him, binding us in a silent contract. He owed me after I prevented the foreclosure of his family's home, and it wasn't long before I called in that favor. Neither of us could foresee how this debt would attract unwanted attention to us both. Falcon's Nest, a bar and grill on the old Route 7, sits where 3 counties meet, just outside town. It's known as a gathering spot for local cops, an unlikely choice for a private meeting, which is why it was perfect for me. I pulled into the busy parking lot and headed inside. Despite being a police hangout, Falcon's Nest was surprisingly upscale, with a roomy bar and plenty of seating. Being the last Friday of the month, the crowd was lively but not overwhelming, creating the ideal setting for a conversation with Sergeant Cross. The bustle made our encounter appear casual, nothing suspicious. As I entered, most of the patrons shot me hostile glances, a reaction I had anticipated. I was, after all, the prime suspect in the disappearance of my unfaithful wife and her lover, a police detective. There were no charges against me, no bodies, no evidence, just a car that had vanished without a trace. But to them, I was guilty. I had motive, and as a lowly lawyer, I needed solid proof of my innocence. When Devon arrived, it was clear he wasn't pleased with my choice of venue. Tall and well-built, he carried himself with an air of integrity. He had come to repay a debt and purge the guilt of owing a man like me. To be clear, I'm what you might call a crooked lawyer, a man who has played the role of unindicted co-conspirator in at least half a dozen organized crime cases. Devon, on the other hand, was in a desperate place the day he came into my office with a stack of foreclosure documents. Back then, he was a Metropolitan Police officer, struggling with the fallout of a predatory mortgage scam. It was early 2008, and he, his wife, and their 4 kids were on the brink of losing their home. After seeking help from every honest lawyer he could find without success, he turned to me out of sheer desperation. I still don't know why I chose to help him. He was a good cop, loyal to his friends, but he wasn't someone I could exploit, and he couldn't pay me. He admitted that up front. Scammers had drained his last dollar, and the foreclosure was set for the following day. This big, physically imposing man sat in my office, tears in his eyes, telling me about his young daughter battling cancer. He couldn't bring himself to tell her and his other kids that they were about to lose their home. I filed for bankruptcy to delay the sale and then sent a few of my less reputable clients to pay a visit to the mortgage broker, extracting a confession that the foreclosure papers were forged. Essentially, a mortgage scammer under pressure from 2 of the most dangerous men I knew had, for once, told the truth. A larger bribe to the court than Deutsche Bank was willing to pay finally delivered a version of justice. Why I did all that, I'm still unsure. But it was hard for Devon Cross to accept that a shady character like me had saved his family's home. "You picked a strange spot for this," he said, settling into a seat. "Even someone like me has a conscience, so I didn't want him to feel burdened by helping me." "So that's why you chose this place?" he asked, just as Elle, the bartender, approached. "What can I get you, Bruce?" she asked with a smile. We shared a history of harmless flirting and me offering advice she didn't ask for. She was a single mom, having made the mistake of prioritizing looks over reliability in a partner. Despite the tension around me, everyone believed I was guilty, so anyone seen with me could be tainted by association. I noticed that Elle chose to take my order herself when she could have easily passed it on. It reminded me that I still had more people like her in my corner than I realized, but I didn't want them to pay the price for their loyalty. I needed to clean up my life, to show people they could trust me again. Devon Cross represented my chance to do that, but I had to seize it. 2 Boston beers, Eli ordered. "You've got guts, counselor, showing up here where Paul Moreno's friends hang out," Devon said. Paul Moreno was the man who had enticed my wife, dragging me into this mess. He, his flashy Ford GT, and my wife had vanished on the night of March 17th St. Patrick's Day after back-to-back storms had flooded 3 counties around Shari Creek. Out west, they would have called it a river, but here it's just a creek, a name that has caused its share of tragedy. For years, people tried to build bridges and homes near it, only to lose lives and property when the creek overflowed its banks. By the morning of March 18th, emergency crews were too busy rescuing flood victims to realize that my wife and her lover were missing. A few days later, suspicion naturally turned to me. "Fortune favors the bold," I replied to Devon with a smirk. We made small talk for a while before he finally got down to business. After 2 beers, I leaned in and said, "Just tell me what you came here to say, and I'll take care of the rest. Don't worry, no one will ever know the advice came from you." Devon lowered his voice, leaning closer. "They've got a warrant. They're coming for your house and office at 6 a.m. on Sunday." I pushed my chair back abruptly, letting it crash to the floor as I shouted, "Look, when I need advice, I sure as hell won't be getting it from some subway pig, and that guy will be a better friend than you. And for the last time, I don't know what happened to my wife." I stormed out, leaving a bewildered Devon behind. But he was smart enough to realize that everyone would think the worst, that they'd believe every accusation against me. He was an ambitious officer, eager to climb the ranks, and pushing me into a confession would have advanced his career, but being seen meeting with me in secret could ruin him. The encounter at Falcon's Nest was public enough that no one would believe he had tipped me off. As I walked out of the bar, I let out a long breath, knowing I had only myself to blame for how things had unraveled. My emotions had clouded my judgment, and now I'd have to fight hard to escape the crushing weight of justice in this country. Yet my late wife's words about Paul haunted me, stinging like a swarm of bees and draining my heart of hope. October 1st, I saw him again today. He's tall and striking, with wavy black hair. Jenny says she knows him. Actually, she slept with him. He's a cop, so he's probably tailing me because of Bruce. It's hard to imagine my unremarkable Bruce drawing such suspicion, but it's likely because of his work as a lawyer for high-profile criminals. His clients are far more intriguing than poor Bruce. Don't get me wrong, I adore him. He's like a big teddy bear, the kind of man you feel secure with. I can't understand why people see him as dangerous. Jenny says the cop tracking me is quite the catch. A real heartthrob. His name's Paul Marrero, and she's been seeing him for the past 6 months. Her husband Bob is a lot like my Bruce, except he runs a dull real estate business instead of handling criminal cases. I can't blame Jenny for falling for a cop's charm. Temptation like that is hard to resist after years of marriage and raising 2 kids. She craves excitement, or so she says. As for me, after 15 years of marriage and a 14-year-old daughter, I'm ready to settle into a quiet life. Women like me don't attract the attention of young, attractive men anymore. It makes me feel ancient. October 15th, Bruce is traveling again. Lately, it seems like he's away more often. If he were anyone else, I might suspect an affair, but Bruce is as loyal as they come, like a faithful dog. He joined a gym today, thanks to Jenny. She's into fitness and wanted a workout partner. I'm not in bad shape, not like Bruce, who's struggling with middle age, but I figured I could use a little toning too. I've increased my morning jog from 1 mile to 2, but I still need to work on my stomach and thighs. I've been feeling anxious about my daughter leaving home. Maybe getting into better shape will help. Why did I let my 14-year-old convince me to send her to boarding school? Rachel is just like my mother, driven, with little regard for others' feelings. Mum still mocks my choice of career, but I believe helping others is the noblest calling. Being a social worker can be tough, but on those rare days when you truly make a difference in someone's life, it's worth it. Rachel might be trying to escape the shadow of Bruce's reputation. People say awful things, and a teenage girl can be incredibly sensitive. Maybe it's best for her to be away, but I'll still miss her. I saw him again today. God, he's handsome. He was at my gym, looking like a model in a fitted suit that highlighted his abs. I tried not to stare at the bulge in his shorts. Why he's still following me, I can't understand, but Paul Marrero has definitely caught my eye. October 17th, I saw Paul Marrero at the gym again today. He held my gaze until I had to look away. Jenny thinks he's interested in me, but I can't imagine why unless it's because of Bruce. Lately, I've been thinking about Paul a lot. It's just a harmless fantasy, right? Nothing wrong with that. November 2nd, I voted today, though it probably won't make a difference. As I was leaving the polling station, I saw Paul again. He wasn't even trying to hide this time. He hadn't been trailing me for a while, but in the last few days he's reappeared. Today he actually spoke to me. "Are you following me again?" I asked, turning to face him. "Well, that's my job and my excuse," he replied with a smirk. "But what if I was following you for different reasons?" "Why would you do that?" I questioned, narrowing my eyes. He grinned. "Have you looked in a mirror lately?" I rolled my eyes and waved him off. "Stop it, I'm a mom with a teenage daughter." He leaned in, his tone playful. "Ever heard of the term MILF?" "No, what's that?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. He inched closer. "It's a term for a hot mom who catches the attention of younger guys." "Stop it, I'm an old lady," I said, shaking my head. He chuckled softly. "Yes, you're an older woman, but not old, just seasoned." Just then, I spotted someone I knew and quickly ended the conversation. I couldn't believe he was flirting with me like that. Sure, I've dropped 5 pounds since I started hitting the gym, but the idea of a younger man being interested in me, it's flattering. I used to feel insecure around all those younger women with their toned bodies, but sticking to my personal trainer's plan is clearly paying off. Even Bruce noticed. He just sent me 24 roses, and when I called to ask why, he said he just wanted to send flowers to his beautiful wife. What can I say about a man like that? I love him deeply. Sure, I might flirt with a handsome young man, but I'd never betray my devoted husband. "Jake," I said as soon as he picked up the phone. "Do you know what time it is, counselor?" he groaned, sounding like I'd just woken him up. "I've been calling you since about 9, I snapped, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "I was working," Jake Trumbull replied. "Well, I've got a new job for you," I said, cutting straight to the point. "Can't it wait?" he asked, clearly unenthusiastic. "No, it's urgent," I insisted. "What is it?" he replied, sounding more alert now. "I need a complete black binder at my place and my office by dawn on Sunday." "This Sunday?" Jake asked, clearly taken aback. "Yes, this Sunday," I confirmed. "It usually takes 72 hours, and you're giving me 24 at best," Jake pointed out. "I'm sorry, but I just got word that I need it," I explained. "Well, it's going to cost you," Jake warned. "How much?" I asked, bracing for the answer. 35. "That's my special rate, considering all the work you've sent my way. For anyone else it'd be 50, he said. He didn't mention that I probably wouldn't be around to send him more business anytime soon. At this stage, whether or not I was a valuable client didn't matter. He could name any price, and I'd have no choice but to pay. "Fine, just do it," I replied. November 9th, I've seen Paul 3 times this week. He always smiles and waves now. Jenny is fully involved with him and claims he's the best lover she's ever had. He's 29, 8 years younger than me. Jenny says being with him makes her feel like a teenager again. Today, while I was at Starbucks enjoying my mocha latte, Paul approached my table and sat down. He stayed silent for a while, just watching me while I did my best to ignore him. Finally, he broke the quiet. "I've been reassigned," he said, breaking the silence. What I replied, confusion creeping into my voice. "I'm no longer officially following you," he explained. "And what does that mean?" I asked, still trying to wrap my head around it. "Well, for one, it means my bosses don't think you're involved in any crimes your husband might have committed," he said calmly. Then, unexpectedly, he reached across the table and placed his hand on mine. "But it also means I can finally tell you how much I like you. I'd like us to get to know each other better." I pulled my hand back slightly. "You know I'm married. What do you mean by get to know me better?" He gently took my other hand between his. "It means you're a beautiful woman, married to a man who can't make you happy. You deserve to feel what real love is like between a man and a woman." "What about Jenny?" "I've heard you two were involved," I said, trying to steer the conversation away. "Jenny and I were just casual. She's unhappy in her marriage, but I'm looking for something more meaningful," he said, dismissing the subject. "Besides, do you really think any man would choose her over you?" He added with a smile. I met his gaze, keeping my voice firm. "I'm married. I've never cheated on my husband." He leaned in slightly. "Can he say the same? You've seen him. What do you think?" "I think we both know you deserve more," he said softly. That's when I stood up, leaving most of my latte untouched. I had to get out of there. This man was getting under my skin more than I was comfortable admitting, and it unsettled me. December 1st, since running into Paul at the coffee shop, I hadn't seen him, and I felt both relieved and a little disappointed. I missed the attention. He had a way of boosting my ego, and I couldn't deny that I was physically drawn to him. After all, I had never been with anyone but my husband, and I found myself curious about what it might be like with someone else, especially someone as attractive and confident as Paul. After work, I was walking to my car in the DSS parking lot. It was late because paperwork had kept me behind. The lot was well lit but empty, and as I neared my car, I had the eerie sense that someone was watching me. I bent down to open the door, and suddenly Paul appeared right beside me. I jumped, startled. "Paul, you nearly scared me to death. Are you stalking me now?" "I'm sorry," he said, slipping his hand around my waist under my open coat. "I just needed to see you. I can't stop thinking about you." I probably should have felt afraid, but the truth was, he'd been on my mind too. I had wanted to see him. "Please," I begged, "leave me alone. I can't do this to my husband." Instead of answering, he leaned in and kissed me. The electricity between us was undeniable. "I need you," he whispered. "More than I've ever needed anyone. If it were just about me, I'd walk away. But I know you want this too." I couldn't stop myself from kissing him back, but then I pulled away, jumped into my car, and shut the door. I can't. I wish I could, but I can't. They didn't bother knocking. Early Sunday morning, 4 officers in tactical gear picked the lock and burst into my house. I guess they thought they'd catch me off guard, still asleep, but I was already up in the kitchen making what the travel guides call a full English breakfast. Sure, I swapped out the kippers for lox, but I'd found a specialty shop that sold kidney pie. I was frying scrambled eggs when the first officer stormed into the kitchen. "Hope you like scrambled eggs," I said as he grabbed me and shoved me outside. They tossed me into a police van while they tore through my house, ripping up carpets and digging through my flower beds. Luckily, most of my floors were hardwood, so they only damaged a few boards, leaving the upstairs mostly intact. The basement, though, they destroyed. What bothered me the most was how they treated my car's trunk. It seemed unnecessary since I'd left the keys in the ignition, but they appeared more interested in wrecking things than in being thorough. Still, they weren't completely heartless. After they finished tearing apart my place, a few officers I'd known over the years invited me to Denny's for lunch. "So where'd you hide the bodies?" Bruce, they asked, casually. I ordered what they called the big breakfast, though it paled in comparison to the meal I had planned. "As far as I know, there aren't any bodies." "Come on, they vanished in March." "It's October now." "Think it'll rain today?" I asked, changing the subject. "It's been pretty dry since those spring and summer storms. My flower beds are ruined, so I'll need to replant bulbs if I want any blooms next spring. At least I'm better off than the folks near Shari Creek," I added, referring to the flood damage in the area. All the officers at Denny's didn't care about the floods or my flowers. They only had one goal: getting a confession. They were desperate because their evidence was paper thin. But I knew how fast things could shift, like a creek spilling over its banks. "You might not see those spring flowers, but you'll feel better if you cooperate. We know you had your reasons. Maybe you just lost control. Stop being a lawyer for a second and own up to it. We'll work with you." "I don't think it'll rain. Looks like we're in for a drought after all that wet weather. I'll stop by Lowe's later for some light bulbs." "Okay, have it your way, lawyer. But just remember, cop killers face the death penalty in this state. You might want to think long and hard about that." December 9th today was a whirlwind. We got an early call: 5 kids needing protection. Normally I don't work directly with Child Protective Services, but with a bad flu outbreak and people taking time off for the holidays, we were short-staffed and had to be flexible. Finding emergency care for 5 kids under 7 wasn't easy. By 4 a.m., we'd placed the children and set up support for the new foster parents. I felt good about our work until the state foster care department called, unhappy with the arrangements. It was the same bureaucratic nonsense. They worried about childcare payments going to state retirees, calling it potential double-dipping. We spent an hour debating the issue, escalating it all the way to the county executive and the state DSS commissioner. Just when I thought the whole plan would fall apart, I heard from the foster parents. "When are the kids coming?" the woman asked eagerly. "We're ready. My 2 daughters are here to help." "The state's concerned about the payments since you get a state pension," I explained. Her response was fiery. "Tell that fool of a governor he can keep his lousy money, just send the kids." The county executive laughed when he heard this and said, "Send the kids. We'll sue the state for the money later if we have to." It took another 3 hours to get the children settled in their new home. By the time I got home, it was close to 8, and I didn't walk through the door until 9. The first thing I did was take a hot shower. I thought about calling Bruce. Sometimes when I call, we can chat for hours, but other times he seems preoccupied, as if his clients consume all his attention. Usually I wait for him to reach out, but tonight I really needed to talk to someone about my day. Wrapped in my terrycloth robe, I was just about to dial when the doorbell rang. Tightening the robe, I answered the door with the chain on. Paul stood outside, looking both attractive and a bit remorseful. "Can I come in?" he asked. "I don't think that's a good idea," I responded. "I know your husband's away, and you're here alone. I just want to come in for a bit, maybe have a coffee and chat," he said. "I can't, Paul," I replied. "You can trust me," he said, offering a gentle smile. "It's not you I don't trust, it's myself," I admitted. "Please, just for a few minutes," he urged. For some reason, I let him in. I made us coffee, and we settled on opposite ends of the large sectional sofa. As I sat, I adjusted my robe, feeling it was too short for the situation. "Relax," he said, noticing my unease. "I'm not here to take advantage of you. I'm just a friend. I heard you had a tough day." "Yeah," I answered, and as we spoke about my day, I started to feel more comfortable. I convinced myself that there was nothing wrong with 2 people sharing a drink. We transitioned from coffee to wine and ate frozen pizza for dinner. It was close to midnight when Paul finally got to the real reason he had come. "Elaine, I'll always be your friend, but I have feelings for you. Deep feelings. What I feel for you is love," he confessed, making me tense. "Please," he continued, "let me finish. Your husband is in New York right now, meeting with organized crime members and their anti-surveillance specialist. They're strategizing on how to evade government wiretaps. These people are dangerous, and he's assisting them." "Stop, I don't want to hear this. Bruce isn't here to defend himself, and it's unfair," I said, my voice firm. "You're loyal, I see that. But is it fair to you to be tied to a man like that? When I followed you and fell in love, I saw what a kind, compassionate person you are. You're a saint married to a devil. But no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you." As the evening went on, we gradually drifted closer on the couch. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't seem to stop. We both sensed where things were headed, like a train rushing forward with no brakes. Then, suddenly I heard the phone ring. It had probably been ringing for some time, and I realized who it was. "Bruce," I said, pulling away from Paul's hold. It was Bruce, just checking in. "Sorry, did I wake you? I lost track of time," he said. I gathered myself, trying to keep our conversation normal. Bruce was in a chatty mood, rambling on while I watched Paul grow increasingly impatient. Eventually, Paul gave me a resigned smile and left quietly. Bruce's call had pulled me back from a boundary I could never uncross, but deep down, I wasn't sure if I wanted to be saved. The DA's conference room looked like it hadn't been updated in 2 decades, with a worn-out feel to it. Tanya Marshall, daughter of a former state senator who had dodged legal trouble and gotten her a position in the DA's office, now held the title of DA. She wasn't any better or worse than those before her, just another person in power who clamped down on the poor while criticizing the rich for hiring lawyers. "Where's your tool, Mr. Gray?" she asked, leaning forward. "We didn't find it during our search." "A tool," I echoed. "A Smith & Wesson .44 Magnum registered to you. It's missing." "Is it?" "This is the first I've heard of it. It should have been in the top drawer of my nightstand. Is it really gone?" "This would go smoother if we were honest with each other," she said. "Then by all means start. What evidence did your officers supposedly find in my house?" "In due time," she replied. "Then I'll answer your questions when I'm ready," I said, standing up. With that, she handed me a notice regarding my right to appear before the grand jury. That was the real reason for the meeting. I had no plans to show up. I knew the outcome. An indictment was inevitable. The DA had no other choice. They had gone through my wife's desk and taken her journal, revealing her affair. To someone like Tanya, it read like a tragic love story, but I saw it differently. It was a pity about the desk. It was a small colonial-era piece that had sat in a dealer's display for nearly a year. We had just married, our daughter Rachel was learning to walk, and Elaine was working on her master's in social work while I was a struggling new lawyer. I loved her and knew how much she wanted that desk. Every time we passed the shop, she'd pause to admire it. I saved every penny I could, and when I finally went to buy it for our anniversary, it was gone from the display. The manager told me it had been moved to the back, and when it arrived at our apartment, Elaine was thrilled. Over the years, I watched her use that desk, and it always made me feel lucky to have her. Love, after all, is built on those small moments. Her joy over that antique desk, our daughter's first steps, buying our first home, and Elaine's pride when she earned her master's degree. These little moments add up to what people call love. When they broke open the desk and found the journal, I suppose I could have left the drawers unlocked, but then they might not have noticed the diary. Locking them made it more obvious, and I needed them to find it. Still, seeing the desk destroyed stung. Perhaps it drove home the fact that Elaine was truly gone. The journal did what I expected. It quickly leaked, and the DA's office felt the pressure increase. They believed they had evidence, and the public knew about the affair. My unfaithful wife and her lover had become a modern Romeo and Juliet in the media's eyes. January 2nd, I can't go through with this, can I asked Jenny, my voice heavy with doubt. She just laughed at my hesitation. What's your problem? Your husbands are away, and you can sneak over to his place. No one will ever know. It's easy. How am I supposed to face Bruce again? I asked, feeling the weight of guilt. I don't care what people say about him. He's always been good to me. What do I say if he finds out? Blame him for leaving you alone so much, Jenny said, dismissing my concerns. He doesn't leave that often, I mumbled, trying to defend Bruce, despite my own internal conflict. And when we're together, we have a good marriage. It's just that Paul makes me feel things I've never felt before. Like I said, Bruce won't find out, and if he does, just handle it like I did with Bob, Jenny replied nonchalantly. What did you do? Remember when we got here and Bob seemed upset, she began. At one point he went to lie down, looking almost sick. He had found out I slept with Paul, and I told him everything. I said I still loved him, but there was nothing he could do about it. I told him a man like Paul knows how to treat a woman. Bob probably wanted to do something about it. But he couldn't match up to Paul. Well, you're lucky Bob doesn't own a weapon, I muttered. I knew Bruce wasn't the kind to react violently, but I voiced my doubts. Honestly, I don't think Bruce would respond like Bob did. I believe he'd take action in his own way, I admitted, but Jenny disagreed, insisting he'd handle it just like Bob. Yet deep down, I understood Bruce was different. In the past 3 weeks, I had encountered Paul about 6 times. We were never truly alone, but I could sense him observing me, maybe even watching Bruce. Today, Bruce was at home, being particularly attentive, and that's when Paul discreetly handed me a note. It contained an address, a date, and a time. I suspected it was the location of his apartment, and at the time corresponded to Bruce's trip to New York. I kept telling myself I wouldn't go, that I'd just confront Paul and ask him to leave me alone, but I knew I would. January 15th. What have I done? I spent the entire day at Paul's apartment. It began as planned. I told him we shouldn't be alone together, that I couldn't betray my husband. But everything spiraled, and we ended up in bed. I left his place in tears, vowing it would never happen again, but neither of us believed it was truly over. As I walked out of his apartment, I knew I would return. Tanya's presentation before the grand jury was a cut above her usual work, likely crafted with the help of a ghostwriter. Her boss, District Attorney Silver Marks, was present, unwilling to let her take all the credit but wise enough not to handle the case herself. I chose to represent myself, despite Judge Bascom's warning that a lawyer representing himself has a fool for a client. I shot back. Better than having a fool for a lawyer, Bascom would do everything in his power to ensure justice, which in this context meant pushing for my conviction. He'd twist the meaning of reasonable doubt into something resembling guilty until proven innocent in his instructions to the jury. My main concern was that someone might catch on to the advantage I was keeping hidden, waiting for the right moment to use it. They had a dramatic narrative, a tale of doomed lovers, a police officer and my wife, a social worker, while I had the truth. In the courtroom, fairness is rarely the reality. "Sergeant McVeigh, did you open the trunk of the defendant's car?" Tanya asked her first witness. "Yes." The car immediately struck me as suspicious. It was an old brown Toyota Camry, not what you'd expect a wealthy lawyer to drive. "It's very unassuming, but it has a big trunk," McVeigh replied, painting a picture for the jury. "I see," Tanya said, flashing a smile toward the jury as if to suggest I was hiding something. "And did you find anything in the trunk?" "It appeared recently cleaned, but we discovered hair and fibers consistent with those of Officer Paul Moreno and Elaine Gray," McVeigh stated. "So it's possible their bodies were transported in that trunk?" Tanya asked, giving the jury a knowing look. "Objection." "That's speculation," I interjected, but Judge Bascom predictably sided with the prosecution. "Overruled. The witness is an expert. He's offering his professional opinion," the judge ruled. Tanya turned back to McVeigh. "Sergeant," she urged. With newfound confidence, McVeigh declared, "In my expert view, the Camry was used to move and dispose of your wife and her lover's remains." When it was my turn to cross-examine, I addressed McVeigh. "If the bodies were moved in the Camry, what about the bright blue Ford Mustang Shelby 500 GTT?" McVeigh looked puzzled. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Paul Moreno's car, his cherished Mustang. It's still missing, isn't it?" I clarified. "I don't have information on that," McVeigh mumbled, clearly caught off guard. "But you do know his car is missing, right? And that car is anything but subtle, correct?" I directed this question more to the jury than to McVeigh. After a pause, McVeigh reluctantly agreed. "Yes, Paul's car is missing." "Now, back to the Camry," I continued. "You broke into the trunk. Why didn't you just use the keys already in the ignition?" McVeigh hesitated, but Tanya quickly objected. "That question is argumentative and assumes facts not in evidence." The judge, predictably, sustained the objection. I didn't push further. McVeigh's confidence wavered as he left the stand. Next, investigator Kim Ang took the stand and eagerly described finding traces of blood after pulling up the carpet in my basement. "Were you able to identify the blood by type or DNA?" Tanya asked, her tone suggesting she was leading up to a critical point. "No, it was too degraded," Ang replied, "but there was a strong scent of bleach, which is why I suspected blood had been there. Bleach is often used to clean up such stains." When it was my turn to question Ang, I kept it straightforward. "The basement is used as a laundry room, isn't it?" "Yes," Ang confirmed. "So finding bleach in a laundry room wouldn't be unusual, right?" I pressed. "I can't say for sure. It depends on the person doing the laundry," Ang hedged. The 7 women on the jury seemed unimpressed by Ang's evasive answer. But the real turning point came with the reading of my wife's diary. January 16th. I'm racked with guilt, yet I feel like I'm floating. I can't stop thinking about Paul, his incredible physique, the way he made me feel. But the remorse over Bruce is overwhelming. For the first time, I want to believe all the horrible things people say about him, but I know they aren't true. Bruce has always been kind and loving, and I've repaid him with the worst betrayal. It feels like my guilt is written on my face, that Bruce will look at me and immediately know what I've done to him, to us. The desk I'm writing at was a gift from Bruce, bought when money was tight. It's a genuine antique, and I used to admire it in the shop window, knowing we couldn't afford it. Even during our struggles, I stopped using birth control without discussing it with Bruce. He never criticized me for that. He was overjoyed when I became pregnant. Despite our financial difficulties, he somehow managed to buy me this extravagant gift. My loving husband of 15 years, and this is how I repay him. I keep agonizing, should I end things with Paul forever, or should I run straight back into his arms? Bruce is returning from his trip tonight, and perhaps he'll pick up on what's been happening, which might resolve everything one way or another. I'm not sure how to approach the conversation. I don't want to cause him pain. January 17th last night was uneventful. If Bruce has any suspicions, he didn't show it. Still, there was an odd distance between us, though it could be my guilt making me imagine it. Bruce seemed exhausted, so I guess I'll have to wait and observe. I left early this morning for work, unable to look him in the eye. Shortly after arriving at work, Paul called me. We talked until I needed to get back to my duties, and somehow that chat lifted my spirits, giving me hope that things might eventually be okay. I must admit that what I feel for Paul is love, though not quite like my love for Bruce. It's a new feeling for me. January 19th, I took an extended lunch break today, not for eating, but to meet Paul at his apartment. He works from 4 p.m. to midnight, so we had a few hours together. When I got back home, Bruce seemed relaxed, but I can't help sensing that something feels different between us, an unexplained distance. February 12th, the past month, has been a whirlwind. My relationship with Paul has deepened, and we now meet at least twice a week during the day and occasionally in the evenings when Bruce is away, which has been more frequent lately. Paul revealed that Bruce is entangled with some dangerous people. The FBI is worried because Bruce is assisting them with anti-surveillance technology that obstructs their investigations. The devices are illegal but can be acquired with specific permits. Paul didn't explicitly state it, but I know he's keeping tabs on Bruce. I should appreciate that Paul always knows Bruce's whereabouts, but the tension between Paul and me has grown. I'm caught between two men I care about, and their conflicts have me trapped in a situation with no easy way out. Bruce has always been a good husband, showering me with gifts, sending flowers, and showing his love, but I can't dismiss the sense that he knows something. He hasn't said anything, but after 15 years together, I can tell when something is troubling him. March 16th, Rachel is back for spring break. I haven't seen her since Christmas, and she seems cheerful, though I suspect she chose boarding school to escape the rumors about Bruce. She loves him, but can't escape the gossip. It must be hard for her to hear what people say about her father. With Rachel around, Paul and I can't meet at my house anymore, and Paul mentioned that his colleagues are becoming suspicious. If anyone found out about us, it would ruin his career. Paul is considering asking for a transfer and wants me to leave Bruce, but I realize that what Paul is asking is wrong. What I've been doing with him is wrong on many levels. Seeing Rachel reminds me that, above all, I am her mother and Bruce's wife. They don't deserve the hurt I would cause by leaving with Paul. The pain I would inflict on my family outweighs my own heartache over losing Paul. I think I'm finally coming to my senses. My feelings for Paul have clouded my judgment. I need to make the right decision, and when I see Paul tomorrow, I'll end it. It will hurt him, but he'll get through it. Jenny is waiting for him. I know she's young, beautiful, and captivated by him. Her husband Bob doesn't stand a chance against someone like Paul. People say Bruce isn't like other men. Would he harm Paul if he knew? I don't believe Bruce would ever hurt me, but perhaps I'm mistaken. The rumors, the terrible things people say about him, they can't all be true, can they? I've known Bruce for so long, yet doubts remain. Paul keeps insisting that Bruce is dangerous and that I'm at risk, but I struggle to believe Bruce could harm anyone. March 17th, tomorrow, I'll end things with Paul. It's the right choice, even if it's painful. I reached out to Jenny, suggesting she might need to comfort Paul after tomorrow. The young paralegal Tanya had read my wife's final diary entry aloud. The prosecution tried to portray me as a jealous, violent husband who stood between two lovers, but Elaine's diary painted a different picture. After all, she chose to remain at home instead of running away with the man who pursued her. Paul Moreira was the one who intruded on our marriage, knowing full well that my wife was content in her marriage. Perhaps he believed the stories spread by law enforcement or thought he was rescuing the woman he loved, but in the end they delayed too long and faced a tragic outcome. In a case like this, there are countless what-ifs. What if Elaine had confessed to me sooner, or if their affair had ended earlier? We'll never know how things might have turned out, but none of that is relevant now. What matters is saving my own life. After hearing Elaine's diary, the jury seemed inclined toward a conviction, and it was evident to everyone in the courtroom. I had a long list of witnesses, but only one mattered: Jake Trumbull. On paper, he appeared to be just another witness, with a 500-page technical report and a video mentioned on page 439. We began with his qualifications: a degree in electrical engineering from RIT, service in Army intelligence, and 2 decades with the FBI. Not bad. What I hadn't fully accounted for was that after leaving the FBI, Jake had been hired by the same criminal networks he once chased for the government. He had become indispensable to me and others in resisting government surveillance. "Mr. Trumbull, have you worked for me before?" I asked. "Yes, several times," he replied. "And during your last job for me, what exactly did you do?" I continued. "I installed a complete video surveillance system covering your home and office inside and out. We call it Black Cover. It's designed to capture illicit activities," Trumbull explained. "And what do you mean by illicit activities?" I asked further. "The usual unauthorized entry to place listening devices or plant evidence," he clarified. "Did you find any such activities?" I asked, leaning in. "Yes. My team observed Sergeant McVeigh taking the keys to a brown Camry, opening the trunk, and placing materials from a bag inside. Later he returned with other officers and pried open the trunk with a crowbar, collecting what they called trace evidence from inside." The courtroom buzzed with astonishment. Trumbull, in his element, submitted the video as evidence despite the prosecution's protests. He went on to describe how investigator Ang had planted blood in the basement. Without forensic evidence, the prosecution's case fell apart. They had no proof of a crime, just a missing couple, a missing tool, and an unremarkable car. When the not guilty verdict was announced, my daughter Rachel embraced me tightly. She never believed I had harmed her mother, and that's all that mattered to me. Many still believe I got away with murder, yet surprisingly, no action was ever taken against the officers who tried to frame me. In a way, they inadvertently saved me by presenting the prosecution with a case too flimsy to secure a conviction. The dry summer exposed a blue Ford Mustang buried in the now receded mud of Shari Creek, revealing the bodies tightly packed inside. It turned out that floodwaters had swept the vehicle away, allowing it to settle deep within the creek's swift currents. Along with her remains, they found Elaine's purse, which still contained the GPS tracker I had placed. Elaine's suspicions had been valid. I was gathering proof of her infidelity. I loved her, but her actions had caused me deep pain. To me, Paul Moreno was the intruder who tried to tear apart a happy marriage. It was heartbreaking, but I intended to seek a divorce, not resort to murder. Yet the authorities wouldn't have believed that my wife and her lover were gone. Even if I were completely innocent, they'd have convicted me. But I was no saint. Elaine's body lay beneath Paul's in the car, and the autopsy revealed they were both shot. The bullets, initially aimed at Paul, passed through him and struck her, making it a double homicide. The weapon was a powerful .44 caliber Smith Wesson, the same one that vanished from my nightstand. Had the police exercised patience, they wouldn't have needed to plant false evidence. The lover's tale and the leaked diary had prompted them to act hastily. I was set up, but skill and luck allowed me to escape. As a lawyer, I took pride in my abilities. Law enforcement lamented that the justice system had been outmaneuvered by a crafty attorney, but ultimately I prevailed. La put down her beer, smiled warmly, and placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. We were at Chambers, a bar where the town's lawyers gathered. LTI had moved to a new job and I had followed her out of loyalty. Chambers was a far better place for me to unwind than Falcon's Rest, where the police still held a grudge over my courtroom victory. Here the regulars showed a certain understanding toward a disgraced lawyer, a down-on-his-luck attorney with a tarnished name, but that image wasn't entirely true. My acquittal, despite obvious guilt, was seen by the right clients as proof of my expertise. The bad press only led me to increase my hourly rates and hire a young assistant to manage the growing demand. Rather than being shunned, I was turning into a kind of anti-hero. Tanya, on the other hand, wasn't as fortunate. She was pushed out of the DA's office, made the scapegoat for the prosecution's failure. The fact that her case was built on fabricated evidence didn't matter. The public needed someone to blame, and she was the easiest target. Meanwhile, my practice flourished. I had endured the toughest ordeal of my life, and ironically, it made me more prosperous than ever. I had earned a new reputation as a lawyer who could get even the guilty acquitted, whether they deserved it or not. At Chambers, I took a sip of my beer and leaned back, feeling the burden of recent events begin to lift. My drinking companion, Bob, another attorney, took a large gulp of his beer. "Take it easy, Bob, there's no rush," I said with a grin. "I don't have a wife waiting at home, and yours isn't worth hurrying back to." Bob frowned, as he always did when I brought up his wife, Jenny. I think he finally understood that some women, no matter how stunning, aren't worth the trouble. Jenny certainly fit that description. "I'm sorry," Bob started, but couldn't finish. "Please," I interrupted, waving him off. "There's no need for an apology. You must understand that none is expected under the circumstances." He hesitated before adding, I never meant to harm Elaine." "Of course you didn't. It was an accident, Bob. A man like you doesn't handle firearms often. You couldn't have known the bullets would pass through Officer Morrow and strike the woman with him. And let's not sugarcoat what they were doing. It wasn't just being together. They were in the middle of something." Bob winced, clearly uneasy with the memory. "Exactly. He had the seats laid flat like a bed. You couldn't even see who was in the car." I was upset, reeling after Jenny told me she was seeing him again. "Yes, you were in a daze, not thinking clearly. But tell me, did you wipe my gun for prints before leaving it behind?" I asked in a hushed tone. Bob went pale, swallowing hard. "Probably. I wasn't thinking straight. I took it from your home when I visited. I planned to scare Paul, make him keep his distance. I knew you kept the gun in your bedroom." "I did," I replied, staring into my beer. "It was a gift from a client. I kept it there to protect Elaine when I wasn't home." Bob nodded, and I wondered if he realized the cruel irony. The very weapon meant to keep Elaine safe had ended her life. "She told me she was going to meet him again," Bob said, his voice quivering. "She said it without any shame. Paul needs a little reassurance, she told me. I couldn't just sit back. I drove to where I thought they might be. His car wasn't there, and I panicked. I called home, no answer. I jumped to conclusions." "A reasonable mistake, given the situation," I replied flatly. "Yes," Bob murmured. It was already pouring by the time I reached the county road near the creek. I parked and walked down. On a clear night, the moon would have lit everything up, but the weather was terrible. I heard them laughing in the car, then a sound from her. And I snapped. I fired without thinking. I don't even remember holding the gun." Bob exhaled deeply, visibly disturbed by the memory. "I didn't realize Elaine was in the car until much later. I'm so sorry, Bruce. Will you tell the police?" he asked, barely audible. I shrugged. "It's not my place to judge you, Bob. I'm a lot of things, but I'm no hypocrite. But I killed your wife," Bob insisted, almost as if he needed to hear it again. "Yes, but it wasn't intentional, just a terrible accident. I have no idea how the car ended up in the creek. I thought it would be found sooner, but as time went on, people started accusing me. It was expected," Bob replied. "But without the bodies or the weapon, they couldn't prove anything. I had put a GPS tracker in Elaine's purse, so I knew the car's location. I figured the creek had swallowed it. The evidence was always there. It was just a matter of time before it surfaced. I'm sorry for everything. And I'm sorry people still believe you did it." "You should turn me in," Bob said with resignation. I shook my head slowly. "We can't control what people think, Bob, and I won't replace a convenient lie with a harsh reality. You're safe from me, then why did you bring me here?" Bob asked, clearly baffled. "To give you this," I said, pulling a folded paper from my jacket and handing it over. "What is this?" he questioned, eyeing the document warily. "My bill, naturally," I replied calmly. "I prepared an excellent defense for your predicament." "But you defended yourself, not me," he protested. "And whose fault is that? I invested time and resources. The responsible party should bear the cost. Besides, I must say I did a superb job." Bob looked at the figure on the invoice. "It's not unreasonable," he admitted in a hollow tone. "It was an impressive defense," I corrected. Bob sighed and pulled out his wallet. "Do you accept American Express?" he asked. "Of course," I said, watching him swipe the card. He seemed relieved that I would keep his secret, and I knew Bob would carry that burden for the rest of his days. As for me, I had done what I needed to survive in a world where innocence is often presumed guilty. I had to rely on my wits. After Bob left, La brought me another beer. She noticed the look on my face and asked, "Are you all right?" I nodded slowly. "Yes," I replied. "Things are finally turning around." And as I sat in the quiet bar, the weight of everything that had transpired slowly began to ease. In the end, survival was all that truly mattered,